The large metal doors of the training hall opened with a loud hiss. 200 young beings walked inside, their boots making different sounds on the polished floor. Some had heavy steps, others made soft clicks, and a few seemed to float without making any noise at all. These were the new cadets at the Galactic Military Academy, and today was the most important day of their training. Jake Martinez walked with the other humans near the back of the group. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and his green eyes looked around the huge room with interest but no fear. Next to him, his friend Carlos Rivera whispered nervously about what was going to happen. Behind them, Ashley Brooks kept checking her uniform to make sure everything was perfect. The training hall was bigger than a football field. The walls were white metal that gleamed under bright lights. Windows along the top showed the stars outside, reminding everyone they were on a space station far from home. In the center of the room was a raised platform where several officers stood waiting. Jake had heard stories about this day from older cadets. Every new student had to pass the War Beast test. It was a tradition that went back hundreds of years, and nobody who failed it ever became an officer in the Interstellar Defense Corps. The thought of it made most cadets nervous, but Jake felt calm. Growing up on his grandfather's ranch in Montana had taught him about animals, and he knew the most important thing was not to show fear. The cadets arranged themselves in long lines facing the platform. Jake could see beings from 12 different worlds. The tall, thin Zephyrians stood like praying mantises, their green skin shining under the lights. Their leader was a female named Kira, who had already impressed the instructors with her quick thinking. The Viridians looked like walking crystals, and they hummed soft music when they were nervous. A group of rock-like Corvins stood perfectly still, as if they were carved from stone. Commander Hayes stepped forward on the platform. He was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his face from old battles. His voice was strong and clear when he spoke. "Cadets, today you will meet Fenris. He is a war beast from the planet Theraxis, home to the galaxy's greatest warriors. For 300 years, Fenris has tested every cadet who enters this academy. He can smell things about you that you don't even know about yourself. He can tell if you are brave or cowardly, if you are a leader or a follower, if you have the heart of a warrior or the soul of a coward." The commander paused and looked across all the young faces. "Some of you will pass this test. Some will not. Those who fail will be sent to other branches of the military, where they can still serve with honor. But only those who pass will have the chance to become officers in the Defense Corps." A door at the side of the room opened and Fenris walked in. Jake had never seen anything like him. The war beast was huge, bigger than any animal on Earth. He stood almost 8 feet tall at the shoulder with muscles that moved under his black fur like cables. His eyes were golden yellow, bright and intelligent. When he walked, there was no sound at all, as if something that big could move like a shadow. Fenris went to the first line of cadets and began his work. He sniffed each one carefully, taking his time. His large nose moved over their bodies, reading stories written in scent that only he could understand. Some cadets he barely looked at before moving on. Others got more attention, but then he would shake his massive head and continue down the line. Jake watched and learned. He saw that the cadets who were most nervous got the least attention from Fenris. Those who tried to stand taller or puff out their chests were ignored. But the ones who stood quietly and calmly, who met the beast's eyes without looking away, those were the ones Fenris spent time with. The war beast moved to the Zephyrian section. He sniffed Kira for a long time, and Jake could see approval in those golden eyes. The beast made a low rumbling sound that seemed to say he was pleased. Kira stood perfectly still, her large insect-like eyes focused on Fenris without fear. Next came the Viridians. Their crystal bodies rang like bells when Fenris breathed on them, creating music that filled the hall. He seemed to enjoy their songs, tilting his great head to listen. One young male named Cord got special attention, and Fenris sat back on his haunches and howled once, a sound of respect. The Corvins were next. These rock-like beings from a heavy-gravity world were natural warriors, but even they seemed small next to Fenris. He sniffed their leader, a massive male called Boulder, and gave another approving rumble. Then Fenris reached the human section. Jake felt his heart beating faster, but he kept his breathing steady like his grandfather had taught him. When they were hunting in the mountains, fear had a smell, and animals could always sense it. The key was not to be fearless, which was stupid, but to be calm in the face of fear. The war beast sniffed Carlos first. Jake's friend was trying hard to look brave, but sweat ran down his face and his hands shook slightly. Fenris looked at him for a moment, then moved on without interest. Ashley was next. She had practiced standing at attention for hours, and her posture was perfect. But when Fenris's huge head came close to her, she closed her eyes and held her breath. The beast sniffed once and moved away. Then it was Jake's turn. Fenris approached slowly, his golden eyes fixed on Jake's face. The young man from Montana stood relaxed but alert, the way he had learned to stand when his grandfather's hunting dogs were deciding whether to accept him into their pack. He looked directly into Fenris's eyes, not as a challenge, but as an equal meeting, another equal. The war beast's nostrils flared as he took in Jake's scent. His ears came forward and that low rumble started deep in his chest again, but this was different from the sounds he had made before. This was deeper, more intense, like distant thunder. For a long moment they stared at each other. The entire hall became silent. Even the Viridians stopped their musical humming. Every eye was fixed on the human and the war beast. Then something happened that nobody expected. Fenris sat down. It was not a casual sitting like a dog resting in the sun. This was the formal position that every warrior from Theraxis learned as a child. The war beast's massive body lowered until his chest touched the floor, but his head remained high and proud. His golden eyes never left Jake's face, and his tail, thick as a man's arm, swept once across the polished metal floor. Gasps echoed through the training hall. Jake heard Carlos make a choking sound beside him, and someone behind him whispered a curse in a language he didn't recognize. Even the officers on the platform looked shocked. Commander Hayes stepped forward, his scarred face showing surprise for the first time anyone could remember. Jake had no idea what was happening, but he knew it was important. The war beast was still staring at him, waiting for something. Acting on instinct, Jake slowly extended his right hand, palm down, toward Fenris's massive head. His grandfather had taught him this gesture when working with the pack dogs back home. It showed respect without fear, leadership without aggression. Fenris sniffed Jake's hand once, his wet nose warm against the young man's skin. Then the war beast gently bumped his head against Jake's fingers and made a sound that was part growl, part purr, and completely peaceful. The hall erupted in excited voices. Cadets from every species began talking at once, their translators working overtime to convert dozens of languages into comprehensible chatter. The officers on the platform huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Commander Hayes raised his hand for silence, but it took several minutes for the noise to die down. In 300 years, the commander said, his voice carrying clearly across the large room, Fenris has only shown this level of recognition to 3 cadets. Each of them went on to become legendary leaders in the Defense Corps. Cadet Martinez, you have been marked by one of the galaxy's greatest judges of character. Jake felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He had not asked for this attention, and he wasn't sure he wanted it. All he had done was treat the war beast the way his grandfather had taught him to treat any animal, with respect and without fear. But as he looked around at the faces staring at him, he realized his life had just changed in ways he couldn't understand yet. Fenris rose to his feet and continued down the line of humans. But his inspection of the remaining cadets was quick and perfunctory. The great beast seemed to have found what he was looking for. When he finished with the humans, he moved on to the other species. But Jake could tell the war beast's attention was no longer fully focused on his task. After Fenris completed his rounds, and was led away by his handlers, Commander Hayes dismissed the cadets to their evening meal. But Jake found himself surrounded by curious classmates before he could take 2 steps toward the exit. "How did you do that?" asked Kira, the Zephyrian leader. Her large compound eyes reflected the overhead lights as she studied Jake with scientific interest. "My people have studied Theraxian behavior for decades, but we have never understood the sitting ritual." "I didn't do anything special," Jake replied, still feeling overwhelmed by the attention. "I just treated him like I would any animal back home." A Corvin named Stone pushed closer, his rocky skin scraping against other cadets. "Humans are pack hunters, yes? Perhaps this explains the war beast's reaction. Theraxians also hunt in packs." "But so do Zephyrians," pointed out Cord, the Viridian who had also received approval from Fenris. His crystal body chimed softly as he spoke, "And Corvins live in clan groups. Pack behavior alone cannot explain what we witnessed. Jake found himself wishing he could disappear. Growing up on a ranch in Montana had not prepared him for being the center of attention among beings from across the galaxy. He was used to wide-open spaces and quiet conversations with his grandfather about hunting and animals. This crowd of curious alien faces was making him uncomfortable. Carlos appeared at his elbow, grinning widely. "Come on, hero, let's get some food before the dining hall closes. You can answer questions later." They pushed through the crowd and made their way to the dining hall. The large room was buzzing with conversation about the day's events, and Jake noticed that many cadets pointed at him as he passed. He chose a table in a quiet corner and hoped people would leave him alone, but that hope was quickly shattered. Ashley sat down across from him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jake, do you realize what just happened? Fenris chose you. Not just approved of you, but actually chose you as a leader. Do you know what this means for your career?" "I'm trying not to think about it," Jake said, focusing on his food. The dining hall served meals designed to be acceptable to all the different species at the academy, which meant most of it was bland and boring. Tonight he was grateful for the distraction of trying to figure out what the green stuff on his plate might be. "You can't just ignore it," said Danny Kim, another human cadet who had joined their table. "The instructors are already talking about moving you to advanced leadership classes. I heard Commander Hayes talking to the other officers after we were dismissed." Jake looked up from his mystery food. "What did they say?" "Something about the Alpha program," Danny replied, lowering his voice. "I've heard rumors about it, but nobody knows much. Special training for cadets who show exceptional leadership potential." "Great," Jake muttered. All he had wanted was to serve in the Defense Corps, maybe pilot a ship or work on a space station somewhere. He had never asked to be special or to attract this kind of attention. As if his thoughts had summoned trouble, Commander Hayes approached their table. The other cadets fell silent as the scarred officer stopped beside Jake's chair. "Cadet Martinez, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning. We need to discuss your future training path." The commander's voice was neutral, but Jake could see interest in his dark eyes. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, standing up and coming to attention. "And Martinez," the commander added, "bring your gear. You may not be returning to your current quarters." With that ominous statement, Commander Hayes walked away, leaving Jake staring after him with a growing sense that his quiet life as an ordinary cadet was about to end. "Well," said Carlos, trying to lighten the mood, "at least you're not bored anymore." Jake sat back down and pushed his food around his plate, no longer hungry. Tomorrow would bring changes he wasn't sure he was ready for, but Fenris had seen something in him that even he didn't understand. Maybe it was time to find out what that something was. Jake stood outside Commander Hayes' office at exactly 0800 hours, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with questions about what the Alpha program might be and why he had been chosen for it. The corridor was quiet except for the gentle hum of the space station's life support systems and the soft whisper of recycled air through the ventilation grates. The door slid open before he could knock, and Commander Hayes appeared, looking as stern and battle-scarred as ever. "Come in, Martinez. We have much to discuss." The commander's office was larger than Jake had expected, with walls covered in star charts, battle plans, and photographs of famous military leaders from across the galaxy. A large window looked out onto the training fields where early morning classes were already in session. Jake could see tiny figures running obstacle courses and practicing combat maneuvers. "Sit down," Hayes said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. "Tell me about your background, son. What kind of life did you have before coming to the academy?" Jake settled into the chair, trying to relax despite his nervousness. "I grew up on my grandfather's ranch in Montana, sir. He raised horses and hunting dogs, mostly for wealthy clients who wanted trained animals. I learned to work with the animals from the time I could walk. And your parents? They died in a transport accident when I was 8. My grandfather raised me after that." Jake kept his voice steady, though talking about his parents always brought back painful memories. Hayes nodded and made notes on a data pad. "What did your grandfather teach you about animals?" "Everything," Jake replied. "How to read their body language, how to understand what they're thinking, how to gain their trust and respect without using fear or force. He always said that real leadership comes from understanding what others need, not from making them afraid of you." The commander looked up from his notes with interest. "And how did you apply those lessons yesterday with Fenris?" Jake thought about the question carefully. I could tell he was testing everyone, looking for something specific. Most of the other cadets were either scared or trying to act tough, but I remembered what my grandfather taught me about dominant animals. You don't challenge them directly, but you don't show weakness either. You meet them as an equal and let them make the choice about whether to accept you. Interesting. Hayes set down his datapad and leaned back in his chair. Do you know why Fenris reacted the way he did? Not really, sir. I've been thinking about it all night, but I don't understand what made me different from the others. Hayes smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had ever seen on the commander's scarred face. That's exactly why you're different, Martinez. You don't assume you know better than everyone else, and you don't let pride cloud your judgment. Those are rare qualities in young officers. The commander stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training fields. The Alpha program is classified, so what I'm about to tell you stays in this room. We've discovered that certain individuals have a natural ability to lead mixed species groups in ways that traditional military training can't teach. They can inspire loyalty and cooperation across cultural and biological barriers that normally divide different races. Jake joined the commander at the window, watching a group of Zephyrian cadets practice aerial maneuvers with their natural flying abilities. What does that have to do with me, sir? Humans are still relatively new to the galactic community, Hayes explained. Most species have been spacefaring for thousands of years, and they've developed complex social hierarchies and cultural traditions that can make cooperation difficult. But humans seem to have a unique gift for cutting through all that complexity and finding common ground. I still don't understand why Fenris chose me specifically. Hayes turned to face Jake directly. Because you didn't try to dominate him or submit to him. You treated him as an individual worth respecting, regardless of his species or his role as a test. That kind of thinking is exactly what we need in officers who will command mixed crews on deep space missions. A soft chime sounded from the commander's desk, indicating an incoming message. Hayes walked over and read the display, then looked back at Jake with a serious expression. Your new training starts immediately. You'll be working with 4 other cadets who also showed exceptional potential, though none of them impressed Fenris as much as you did. The program is intense and demanding, and not everyone who enters it succeeds. Are you willing to accept this challenge? Jake thought about his grandfather's words about meeting challenges head-on and not backing down from difficult situations. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Good, report to Training Bay 7 in 1 hour. Your instructor will be Captain Morrison, and I'll warn you now that he has a reputation for being tough on his students. He's a human like you, but don't expect that to earn you any special treatment. Hayes handed Jake a datapad with his new schedule and room assignment. One more thing, Martinez. The other species at this academy will be watching you closely now. Some will expect you to fail because you're human and relatively young. Others will resent the attention you've received. How you handle that pressure will be just as important as how you perform in training. Jake nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. I won't let you down, sir. I hope not, son. The galaxy needs leaders who can bring different species together instead of driving them apart. If the Alpha program succeeds, graduates like you could help prevent the kind of conflicts that have torn apart entire star systems in the past. As Jake left the commander's office and walked through the corridors toward his new quarters, he noticed that other cadets stopped their conversations when he passed. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with envy, and a few with what seemed like hostility. The weight of their attention was uncomfortable, but he remembered his grandfather's advice about leadership. Sometimes the hardest part isn't making the right decisions, but living with the consequences of those decisions. His new quarters were in a different section of the station, one he had never visited before. The corridors here were quieter and more heavily secured, with access panels that required special clearance codes. His room was larger than his previous quarters, with a private study area and advanced computer terminals that could access restricted military databases. As he unpacked his belongings, Jake found himself thinking about the other cadets in the Alpha program. He wondered what qualities they had shown to earn their places, and whether they would accept him as easily as Fenris had. The war beast's recognition had opened a door, but walking through it would require skills and strength that Jake wasn't sure he possessed. An hour later, he stood outside Training Bay 7, taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. Whatever came next would test him in ways he couldn't imagine, but he was ready to find out what kind of leader he could become. Training Bay 7 was unlike any classroom Jake had ever seen. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered with projectors that could create any environment imaginable. As he stepped inside, the room transformed into a dense jungle complete with humid air, strange animal sounds, and the smell of rotting vegetation. Then, just as quickly, it became the bridge of a starship under attack, with alarms blaring and sparks flying from damaged control panels. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a gruff voice behind him. Jake turned to see a man in his 50s with gray hair, weathered skin, and scars that told stories of many battles. "I'm Captain Morrison, and this is where you'll learn what real leadership means." 4 other beings stood near the center of the room, and Jake recognized them from the testing ceremony. There was Kira, the tall Zephyrian with compound eyes that missed nothing. Next to her stood a massive Corvan called Rocky, whose stone-like skin was marked with ritual scars that showed his warrior status. The ethereal luminar named Drift seemed to shimmer and fade at the edges, as if she wasn't entirely solid. Finally, there was Nova, a 4-armed Centaurian female whose blue skin was marked with the intricate tattoos that indicated high birth among her people. "These are your teammates," Morrison continued, his sharp eyes studying each of them. "Notice I said teammates, not subordinates. In the Alpha program, you don't get to pull rank or hide behind military protocol. You succeed together or you fail together." The captain walked around the group, examining each cadet like a hunter evaluating prey. "You're here because you each showed something special during testing. But let me make one thing clear. Special doesn't mean better than everyone else. It means you have potential that could either make you great leaders or spectacular failures." Morrison stopped in front of Jake. "Martinez, you're getting a lot of attention because of what happened with Fenris, but that was just the beginning. A war beast recognizing leadership potential is one thing. Actually developing that potential into something useful is entirely different." The room around them shifted again, becoming a medical facility where injured beings from multiple species lay on examination tables. The holographic doctors and patients looked completely real, and Jake could even smell antiseptic in the air. "Your first scenario," Morrison announced. "A plague has broken out on Colony 7, affecting different species in different ways. You have limited medical supplies, limited transport capacity, and limited time before the disease spreads to other worlds. Who lives, who dies, and how do you make those decisions as a team?" Jake felt his stomach clench as he looked around the medical facility. This wasn't a theoretical exercise about leadership principles. This was about choosing who would survive and who wouldn't, and there were no good answers. Kira spoke first, her translator converting her clicking speech into standard Galactic. "We need more information. What species are affected? How quickly is the disease spreading? And what medical resources do we have available?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Good questions, but you won't get complete information. Real leaders make decisions with incomplete data all the time." A holographic doctor approached them, his face grim. "The disease affects respiratory systems, but differently for each species. Humans and Centaurians recover within days with treatment, but Corvans and Zephyrians die within hours without it. Luminars seem immune but can carry the disease to others." Rocky's deep voice rumbled through the room. "Simple choice. Treat those who will die without help first." "But what about the carriers?" Nova asked, her forearms gesturing at the Luminar patients. "If we don't isolate them, the disease spreads to other colonies." Drift's voice was soft and seemed to come from everywhere at once. "My people don't choose to be carriers. Would you punish us for something we cannot control?" Jake listened to the debate, feeling the weight of the decision. His teammates were all thinking about the problem from their own perspectives, which made sense but wasn't getting them closer to a solution. He thought about what his grandfather had taught him about making hard choices on the ranch. "We're thinking about this wrong," he said quietly, but his voice carried in the medical facility. "We're not just treating patients. We're stopping a plague from spreading across multiple worlds." The others turned to look at him. Morrison's expression was unreadable, but Jake could see the captain paying close attention. "Drift is right that Luminars shouldn't be punished for being natural carriers," Jake continued. "But Nova's also right that we can't let the disease spread. So we create a 3-stage plan. First, we treat the critical cases to save immediate lives. Second, we set up quarantine facilities for the carriers that don't feel like punishment. Third, we use the time we've bought to develop a treatment that works for everyone." Kira's compound eyes focused on him. That requires more resources than we have available. Then we ask for more, Jake replied. Sometimes leadership means admitting you can't solve everything with what you have and finding creative ways to get what you need. Morrison nodded slowly. Explain how you would implement this plan. For the next hour, Jake worked with his team to develop detailed procedures for medical triage, resource allocation, and communication with higher authorities. It wasn't easy, and there were heated arguments about priorities and methods, but gradually they found ways to combine their different perspectives into a workable solution. When the scenario ended and the medical facility faded back to the plane training room, Morrison looked at each of them with something that might have been approval. Not bad for a first attempt, he said. You managed to avoid the most common mistakes, which are either trying to save everyone at once or giving up, because the problem seems impossible. But don't get overconfident. That was the easy scenario. Over the following weeks, Morrison put them through increasingly difficult situations. They dealt with resource disputes between hostile alien races, commanded space battles with inadequate ships and weapons, and negotiated peace treaties between species that had been fighting for centuries. Jake discovered that leadership in mixed groups was incredibly complex. Each species had different values, different ways of thinking, and different ideas about what constituted fair treatment. What motivated a Corvan warrior might offend a Luminar philosopher, and strategies that worked perfectly for humans could be completely ineffective with other races. But gradually, he began to understand what Morrison was teaching them. Real leadership wasn't about imposing your will on others, or even about making the best decisions. It was about helping different beings find common ground and work together toward shared goals, even when they disagreed about methods or priorities. The breakthrough came during their 6th week of training, when Morrison presented them with a scenario that seemed impossible. A deep space research station had been taken over by pirates who were threatening to destroy valuable scientific data unless their demands were met. The station's crew included scientists from 8 different species, each with their own government backing and their own political agendas. The pirates want safe passage, a new ship, and enough credits to disappear into the outer systems, Morrison explained as the training room became the cramped bridge of a rescue ship. The scientists want their research protected, but they can't agree on whether it should be shared freely or kept secret for security reasons. The various governments want their people rescued first, and are threatening military action if their demands aren't met. Jake looked at his teammates and saw the same overwhelmed expression on every face. This wasn't just a leadership challenge. It was a diplomatic nightmare with no clear solution. But as he studied the problem, Jake realized that all the conflicting parties actually wanted the same basic thing. They wanted the situation resolved without anyone getting hurt. The challenge was finding a way to give everyone enough of what they wanted, while preventing anyone from making the situation worse. We offer the pirates what they want, he said finally, but we make the handover contingent on the safe release of all hostages and the preservation of the research data. Rocky shook his massive head. The governments will never agree to negotiate with pirates. They will if we present it as a rescue operation instead of a negotiation, Nova replied, catching on to Jake's thinking. We save face for the politicians while achieving the practical goal. It took 3 hours of intense discussion and planning, but eventually they developed a strategy that addressed everyone's concerns. The pirates got their escape route, the scientists got their research protected, and the governments got their people back safely without appearing to give in to terrorist demands. When the scenario ended, Morrison was actually smiling. Now you're starting to understand what the Alpha program is really about. It's not about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about seeing the bigger picture and finding solutions that work for everyone involved. As they left Training Bay 7 that day, Jake realized that he was beginning to feel like a real leader for the first time in his life. The emergency alarm woke Jake from deep sleep at 0300 hours. Red lights flashed in his quarters as the urgent message played through the communication system. Alpha team to command center immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. Jake rolled out of bed and pulled on his uniform, his mind already shifting into the focused state that months of training had developed. Real emergencies felt different from training scenarios. There was an electric tension in the air, a sense that lives actually depended on the decisions that would be made in the next few hours. The command center was buzzing with activity when Jake and his teammates arrived. Officers moved between workstations covered with star charts, sensor readings, and communication displays. Commander Hayes stood at the center of it all, his scarred face grim as he studied a holographic display of a distant star system. Alpha Team reporting. "Sir," Jake said, bringing his group to attention. Hayes looked up from the display. "We have a situation at Research Station Omega in the Kepler system. The station went dark 6 hours ago, while conducting experiments with quantum tunneling technology. Their last transmission indicated a catastrophic failure that created space-time distortions around the entire facility." The commander touched a control, and the holographic display zoomed in to show a space station surrounded by swirling patterns of distorted space. Conventional rescue ships can't approach because the distortions interfere with navigation and life support systems. "We need a team that can adapt to unknown conditions and make critical decisions without support from command." Kira stepped forward, her compound eyes analyzing the sensor data. "What kind of distortions are we dealing with, Commander?" "Unknown," Hayes replied. The research team was working on experimental drives that could fold space for faster-than-light travel. Something went wrong, and now the station exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Some sections appear to be aging at different rates, others seem to be stuck in temporal loops. Rocky's deep voice rumbled through the command center. "How many people are trapped inside?" 47 researchers and support staff from 8 different species, Hayes said. "They include some of the galaxy's leading scientists working on technology that could revolutionize space travel. But more importantly, they're people who need our help." Jake studied the swirling patterns around the station, remembering his grandfather's advice about approaching unknown situations. "What resources do we have available, sir?" "The fast attack ship Ranger, equipped with experimental shielding that might protect you from the worst effects of the distortions. Specialized environmental suits designed to function in unstable space-time. And your training." Hayes looked at each member of the team. "This is your final examination, but it's also a real rescue mission. People will live or die based on your decisions." 2 hours later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Ranger as it approached the distorted space around Research Station Omega. Through the viewports, he could see the station flickering in and out of existence, its metal hull twisted into impossible shapes by forces that human science barely understood. "Sensors are going crazy," reported Lieutenant Chen from the navigation station. "I'm reading the station in at least 6 different locations simultaneously, and some sections appear to be moving through time backward." Nova worked at the science station, her forearms managing multiple control panels at once. "The quantum field is definitely unstable, but I think I can map safe approach corridors. They shift every few minutes, but there are patterns." Drift's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once as her luminar abilities allowed her to partially phase through the ship's hull and scout ahead. "I can sense life signs inside the station, but they're scattered across multiple dimensional phases. Some of the crew may not even know they're in danger." Jake made his first command decision. "We go in through the main docking bay, but we stay together as a team. The distortions are too unpredictable to split up." The approach to the station was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Space itself seemed to bend around them, and for terrifying moments the Ranger appeared to be flying through solid walls or empty vacuum simultaneously. Only Nova's precise calculations and the ship's experimental shielding kept them from being torn apart by competing gravitational fields. They docked with the station's main airlock. Though docked wasn't really accurate since the station's hull seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Their environmental suits protected them from the worst effects, but Jake could feel reality shifting around them as they moved through the corridors. The first group of survivors they found were trapped in the station's medical bay, which had become stuck in a temporal loop. The same 3 minutes repeated over and over, with the medical staff trying desperately to treat injured colleagues, but never making progress because time kept resetting. "We need to break the loop without disrupting the station's structural integrity," Kira said, her scientific training helping her analyze the situation. Jake studied the problem, thinking about his grandfather's approach to fixing complex systems. Sometimes the solution isn't to force something to work differently. Sometimes you have to work with the problem instead of against it. He had Rocky use his incredible strength to manually override the medical bay's power systems during one of the loop cycles, while Drift phased through the walls to guide the trapped staff out during the brief moment when the loop reset. It took 17 attempts, but eventually all 12 people in the medical bay were free. The next challenge was even more complex. The station's main research lab had become split across multiple dimensions, with different sections existing in parallel realities. Some of the scientists could see and hear their colleagues but couldn't touch them, while others were completely isolated in pocket dimensions that were slowly shrinking. Nova's scientific knowledge was crucial here, as she calculated ways to temporarily stabilize the dimensional barriers long enough for people to move between realities. But the real breakthrough came when Jake realized that the research team's own experimental equipment could be used to create controlled quantum tunnels. "We don't need to fix the distortions," he explained to his team. "We just need to give people a way to move through them safely." It took 6 hours of careful work, with each team member using their unique abilities to solve different aspects of the problem. Kira's analytical skills helped map the dimensional variations. Rocky's strength allowed him to manipulate heavy equipment in unstable gravity fields. Drift's phasing abilities let her scout dangerous areas and guide people to safety. Nova's scientific training provided the technical knowledge needed to operate the experimental systems. But throughout it all, Jake found himself doing what Fenris had recognized in him months ago. He helped different beings work together despite their fears, their cultural differences, and their conflicting ideas about priorities. When the human scientists wanted to save their research data first and the alien researchers wanted to evacuate people immediately, Jake found ways to do both. When panic threatened to overwhelm the survivors, he provided calm leadership that kept everyone focused on solutions instead of problems. The last group of survivors was the most challenging to rescue. The station's power core had become trapped in a quantum bubble that existed outside normal time. The engineering staff inside could see what was happening to the rest of the station, but from their perspective, the rescue had taken place in a few seconds while months had passed in the bubble. Jake made the hardest decision of the mission. Instead of trying to extract the engineers safely, he volunteered to enter the quantum bubble himself to guide them through the emergency shutdown procedures that would collapse the distortions and restore normal space-time around the station. "That's incredibly dangerous," Nova warned him. "The time differential could age you decades in minutes or trap you in the bubble permanently." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But it's the only way to save everyone and prevent the distortions from spreading to other systems." His teammates wanted to argue, but they had learned to trust his judgment over months of training together. Jake entered the quantum bubble and spent what felt like hours working with the engineering team to safely shut down the experimental drive. When he emerged, only minutes had passed in normal time, but he felt exhausted, as if he had been working for days. The rescue mission was successful. All 47 people were evacuated safely, and the dangerous quantum distortions were contained before they could affect other areas of space. But more importantly, Jake had proven to himself and others that the leadership qualities Fenris had recognized were real and could be developed into something useful. 6 months later, Lieutenant Jake Martinez stood in the Academy's main training hall, but this time as an instructor. Beside him sat Fenris, who had requested assignment to Jake's unit after the successful rescue mission. The Warbeast had become not just a test for new cadets, but a partner who helped identify and develop the next generation of leaders. As the newest group of cadets filed into the hall for their evaluation, Jake watched their faces with the experienced eye of someone who had learned what real leadership meant. Somewhere in that nervous crowd was probably another young person who would surprise everyone,